And joining me now to discuss redistricting and higher education tuition going up are Lisa Vorderbrueggen, political editor with the Contra Costa Times, and Nanette Asimov, education writer with the San Francisco Chronicle. Nanette, we'll start with you. What we seem to have is the worst possible outcome. What happened this week?
Well, yet again, both the California State University and the University of California have raised tuition, and not by a little amount, by quite a lot. It was 9.6% for University of California, but that was on top of another one, an 8% already approved for this year. So now students are going to be paying more than $13,000 for a year at UC. This is a university that was really supposed to be free. California State University will be paying about $6,500. This is all before room and board. And they did it in the middle of the summer, so we did not see the kind of protests that we've come to know for the past couple of years with students occupying buildings. It was relatively quiet.
And listening to the treasurer there, it seems as though this could get much worse.
You're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things that the regents and the CSU trustees warned of is mid-year cuts. So if the state does not get revenues that they anticipate, both of the universities say that they will raise tuition again, and perhaps, you know, just an automatic trigger of maybe 5.5% more. I mean, I think that the students really need to start expecting what they've seen is annual raises, and they're really angry about it. And what they tell me is that their family income isn't going up, and tuition is.
But
so they're very angry.
Isn't this a function of sort of shared sacrifice? I mean, there's been cuts everywhere in so many things. I mean, why shouldn't college students be expected to? I mean, I know they're not bearing the full cost of the shortfall.
It's a great question, and it's easy in a sense to put it onto students because they're able to pay, in a sense. They're a source of funding. But what is being argued is that the California State University systems are jewels, really crown jewels of this state. And so you see other areas going down. What was named yesterday was the foster system, the prison system. Everything is feeling the crunch of this horrible economic times. But the university systems are still economic engines. They produce research and development and products, and they're really a jewel of California. And you see the trustees saying, we're going to ruin it all. You know, all the cuts.
What about cutting in other areas other than just increasing fees for students?
Well, it's true that the tuition only takes care of about a quarter of the deficits that these universities see. So both universities talk about all the cuts that are going on in their campuses. So we see layoffs, we see course sections cut back. The chancellors at the Regents meeting this week were talking about how the morale is down and there's long lines for courses. So it's coming on both ends, and students feel it, and they're really mad.
Now, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom was the only no vote on these tuition. Was he just sort of making this empty political statement?
Well,
or, I mean, I heard one of his critics call him irresponsible for the vote.
He and the student trustees but also voted. Oh. But somebody said yesterday.
I think there were a couple of others, weren't there also?
There were
George Marcus.
George Marcus, that's right,
yes.
And one other person. But the lieutenant governors always vote no because they can, and so.
The other big controversy was over the salary of presidents in the system, and the big raise that one got in San Diego.
Exactly.
How did that all come about at the same time?
It was amazing because even as the trustees are raising and the regents are raising the fees, UC San Diego, CSU San Diego campus president got a huge raise, and in UC system, Mark Larrett of the UCSF got about $1 million raise, but that's not from state fund, but others did get very hefty funds paid for by the state. Now, why they do this is that they say, well, these people have worked harder, and they've taken on new responsibilities. And when you say that, well, the lower paid workers say, well, haven't we?
Well, and in the market, I mean, these individuals, in theory, could go somewhere else and the system would lose them, right? Isn't that the argument they make?
A Harvard University headhunter came knocking on the door of Mark Larrett, who is the CEO of the medical center at UCSF. And that was the justification for saying, oh, well, if the headhunter knocked on your door, we will, please, we don't want you to. And they can't have him leave because he's in the middle of some major projects.
Can anybody make them rescind these increases?
It's
the governor, I understand,
is trying, and another assemblyman has sent a letter to UC President Mark Yudof asking for rescinding. I think you will not see that happening. No.
Okay. One controversy, we moved from that to yet another, and that's about where you draw the lines for the districts that our representatives will have to work hard to get elected to. Lisa, tell us about that.
Well, as we may or may not know, once a decade after the census, we redraw our political maps in order to get one person, one vote. So our Senate and legislative and congressional seats are all up for redrawing. And this time around, our voters decided to have a grand experiment in California and have an independent citizens redistricting commission draw those lines instead of a partisan-controlled legislature. And boy, has it been interesting, because now we're seeing laid out in public in all of these hours and hours and hours of meetings and maps exactly how the sausage is made. And I think that people, it comes a little bit under the guise of be careful what you ask for, because now you're seeing real live what those conflicts are, and so many people are so mad that it may end up being the ultimate perfect compromise and that no one is happy with the outcome.
But now the commission, I guess, whether clearly understood or not, has broken a promise of revealing these maps about now.
that is a matter of interpretation that I don't agree with myself, because what the commission did was they initially set up a schedule in which they would release 2 rounds of draft maps before they released their final maps. They canceled the second draft maps in lieu of doing an ongoing sort of rolling out of the internet maps so that they could keep working on the final maps, because they're running out of time. But all of these meetings are on the internet. You could watch hours and hours of blow by blow, and all of the maps are online for you to see. The only thing they didn't do was sort of put out a package of all of sort of this interim set of maps that would go out, and then they would get response to those. But they're continuing to take public comment. They're continuing to roll these maps out. You can go on to wedrawthelines.org at this very moment and pull up more maps than you could ever possibly want.
But how different are they from what we had? Are we going to see some wholly different political landscape?
We're going to see a wholesale change in the landscape, in California, because the previous lines were drawn to protect the incumbents of both parties. There was an unholy alliance. They cut a deal so that all of the incumbents would get reelected, and they almost all of them did, with the exception of one in the last decade. So now you have districts that are being drawn based on city boundaries, communities of interest, geographic constraints. You don't have long arms of things crossing over to pick up a little population of Democrats to get the numbers right.
We used to call that gerrymandering.
Yeah, gerrymandering. People remember what that is. And so that's going away. And now what we're having is this pitched battle between the various communities of interest and ethnic groups, racial groups that want to protect their voting clout. And when they want to be able to elect their representatives to Congress, be you Latino, African American, the gay and lesbian community has their maps out. Everybody's got maps. And
but what it all comes down to is it going to remain a Democratic state? Is it going to be more Republican? Who wins, who loses here?
Well, we're absolutely going to remain a Democratic state based on registration. And most of the analysis of the first draft of maps that came out, now keep in mind they've been rolling along with changes, the Democrats were expected to potentially gain some seats. There's a lot of talk that the Democrats will get the 2/3 that they need in the legislature to avoid having any kind of block by the Republicans for a budget. And the Democrats very much want that. But it will probably be a function of this is where people live and how the lines come out. The commission, in theory, is not drawing those lines specifically to make that happen.
Let's talk about Fremont, where the population there, the Indian population there, had some very strong objections. And also, what are these Voting Rights Act cities, counties, or areas that they're concerned about?
Well, the Federal Voting Rights Act trumps everything else that goes on in mapping. And what it says is that if you are a minority population, they cannot draw lines to dilute your voting power. So you cannot take a whole community of African Americans and split them into 15 pieces to keep any African American from getting elected. And we have a half dozen counties, fewer than that, in the state of California that are official Voting Rights Act counties. In other words, they've had violations in the past, and the feds require pre-approval of that area before their maps can go forward. So. So those areas are one thing, but even in LA County, we've seen this huge push between the Latino community and the African American community. African American community numbers have declined, but they have 3 congressional representatives now. The Latino communities say they should get more, and so you have the Citizens Commission, these amateurs, they're not exactly volunteers, they're getting paid, but who have never done this before, trying to balance out all of these competing interests.
In the end, when will we see the maps?
August 1st will be the final maps. There'll be a 14-day review period. They have till August 15th to adopt them, and then we'll see whether we go to court or go back to the ballot or have a referendum. It's all going to be wild. So,
well away from the problems for a moment, we're going to turn to art.